great hall was bigger than any building Captain Sarah Chen had ever seen. Crystal walls stretched up so high that she could barely see the ceiling. Light came from everywhere and nowhere, making the whole place glow with a soft blue color. She stood in the center of the room, feeling very small. Around her, in rings that went up and up, sat creatures from across the galaxy. Some looked like giant insects with shiny shells. Others were covered in thick fur and had too many eyes. There were beings made of what looked like liquid metal, and others that seemed to be made of pure energy. All of them were staring down at her. Sarah kept her back straight and her face calm. She had been a soldier for 20 years. She had fought in wars that most people could not imagine. But this was different. This was not a battle she could win with weapons or smart plans. This was about words, laws, and ideas that were older than human civilization. Next to her stood David Martinez, her legal helper. He was sweating even though the room was cool. In his hands he held a thick book of galactic laws that he had been studying for months. Behind them sat 5 other humans, all military officers who had fought in the Frontier War. They were here as witnesses. At the front of the room, on a platform that floated in the air, sat the 3 judges. The middle one was tall and thin, with skin like tree bark and eyes that glowed green. This was Judge Mordak of the Sylvan Council. To his left sat Judge Vexilla, who looked like a giant spider made of silver. On the right was Judge Quirin, whose body seemed to be made of flowing water. Judge Mordak spoke, and his voice filled the entire hall without being loud. The Galactic Combat Tribunal is now in session. We are here to decide if the species known as humans have broken the Universal Combat Doctrine during their recent war with the Vorthon Empire. Sarah felt the weight of thousands of eyes upon her. She knew that what happened here today would decide the future of humanity in the galaxy. If they were found guilty, Earth might be cut off from the rest of the universe forever. The prosecutor stood up. Ambassador Clixtal was a Zephyrian, one of the insect-like beings. His forearms moved as he talked, and his voice made a clicking sound between words. Honored judges, what we have seen from the humans is shocking. They have violated 17 different parts of our sacred combat laws. Clixtal pressed a button, and images appeared in the air above them. Sarah saw scenes from the war, human soldiers moving at night, explosions in supply areas, and Vorthon warriors looking confused and afraid. Look at this evidence, Clixtal continued, his voice getting louder. The humans attack at night when all honorable species rest. They hide among civilians like cowards. They strike at supply lines instead of fighting warriors face to face. They use the weapons of their enemies against them. They spread fear and confusion instead of showing courage in battle. Murmurs went through the crowd. Sarah could hear the disapproval in their voices. Many species were nodding their heads in agreement. A new figure stood up in the audience. This was Admiral Thexvar of the Vorthon Empire. Even though his people had lost the war, he was here to support the charges against humanity. He was tall and proud, with dark blue skin and silver markings that showed his rank. The humans fought without honor, Admiral Thexvar said through his translator device. For 3,000 years my people have followed the old ways of war. We meet our enemies in open battle. We fight with courage and respect. We do not hide in shadows like thieves. More voices joined in from around the hall. Representative after representative stood to speak against humanity. Each one told stories of their own species' noble traditions of warfare. The Kalari have always announced their attacks 7 days in advance, said one creature with blue fur and 6 legs. This gives both sides time to prepare and ensures a fair fight. The Torvan Empire only fights during daylight hours, said another, whose body was covered in crystal plates. The night is for rest and prayer, not for killing. We of the Hive Collective only use weapons that we have made ourselves, clicked a being that looked like a walking tree. To take an enemy's weapon and use it against them is the deepest shame. Sarah listened to all of this and felt a strange mix of anger and amusement. These beings talked about war like it was a game with rules that everyone agreed to follow. They seemed to think that fighting should be fair and polite. David leaned over to whisper to her. Sarah, this is not looking good. Every species here has some kind of honor code about fighting. They all think we're barbarians. Sarah nodded but did not look worried. She had expected this. She had read about these species and their traditions. She knew that most of them had not fought a real war in hundreds of years. They had grown comfortable with their rules and forgot why wars were fought in the first place. Judge Vexilla spoke next. Her voice sounded like metal ringing against metal. We have heard the charges. Now we will examine the specific violations. The first charge appeared in the air as words that glowed with red light. Violation of Article 7, attacking during rest periods. Clickstall stood again. The humans attacked Vorthon bases during their sleep cycles. This is forbidden by galactic law. All civilized species agree that there are proper times for fighting. Sarah almost laughed. On Earth, some of the most famous battles in history had happened at night. Surprise attacks were basic military strategy, but she kept quiet and let the prosecutor continue. Violation of Article 12, deception in warfare. The humans disguised themselves as civilians and refugees, Clickstall said with disgust. They lied about who they were and where they were going. They made false radio messages to confuse Vorthon forces. This is the behavior of criminals, not soldiers. The charges kept coming. Using psychological warfare, attacking supply lines, reverse engineering captured technology, fighting in urban areas where civilians might be present. Each violation was met with more disapproval from the audience. Sarah counted 17 charges in total. According to galactic law, even one violation could result in serious punishment. All 17 together could mean that humanity would be banned from space travel and cut off from all other species. When the prosecutor finished, Judge Mordak looked down at Sarah. Captain Chen, you have heard the charges against your species. How do you plead? This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. She stood up slowly and looked around the great hall. Thousands of alien eyes stared back at her. Some looked angry. Others looked disgusted. A few seemed curious about what she would say. Honored judges, Sarah said in a clear, calm voice. I have listened carefully to all the charges. I understand what my people are accused of doing. She paused and took a deep breath. We do not deny any of these charges. The hall erupted in noise. Creatures chittered, roared, and buzzed in dozens of different languages. Some stood up and pointed at her. Others made gestures that she assumed were rude in their cultures. Judge Mordak called for order, and slowly the noise died down. Sarah continued. Yes, we attacked at night. Yes, we used deception. Yes, we fought in ways that you find dishonorable. But before you judge us, I ask for one thing. She looked directly at each of the three judges. I ask for the right to explain why we fight the way we do. I ask for the right to tell you about humanity's history of war, because you cannot judge our actions without understanding where they came from. Judge Quirin's watery form shifted and flowed as he considered this. You wish to present a defense? I wish to present an education, Sarah said. You call us barbarians because we break your rules. But what if I told you that we were never barbarians at all? What if I told you that we had rules of our own, older and harder than yours? The hall fell silent. Even the prosecutors looked curious now. Judge Mordak nodded slowly. Very well, Captain Chen. You will have your chance to speak. But remember, we are not here to learn about human history. We are here to decide if you have broken galactic law. Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the hall. Thank you, honored judges. I think you will find that history and law are more connected than you realize. As she sat back down, David whispered, Sarah, what are you doing? We should be trying to minimize the charges, not admitting to everything. Sarah looked at him with confidence she had not shown before. David, these people think they know what war is. They think their rules are the only way to fight. It's time they learned that there are other ways to survive in this universe. The tribunal would resume tomorrow, and Sarah would have her chance to defend not just her actions, but the entire human way of war. She only hoped that these alien judges were ready to hear truths that might shake their understanding of conflict itself. Sarah stood before the great hall once again. Today she would tell her story. The alien judges waited, and thousands of eyes watched from the crystal galleries above. She had spent the whole night preparing for this moment. Honored judges, she began, to understand why humans fight the way we do, you must first understand who we fought against. The air above them shimmered and images appeared. These were recordings from the war, taken by both human and alien cameras. The first image showed a Vorthon battle cruiser, massive and beautiful, covered in silver armor that gleamed like mirrors. The Vorthon Empire, Sarah said. They are proud warriors. Their technology is hundreds of years ahead of ours. Their ships are faster, their weapons more powerful, their armor stronger. When they decided to invade human colonies, everyone expected them to win easily. Admiral Thexavar nodded from his seat. Even though he was here to accuse humanity, He could not hide his pride in his people's achievements. Sarah continued. The Vorthons followed the old galactic ways of war. They announced their attacks in advance. They fought only during daylight hours. They met our forces in open battle, ship against ship, soldier against soldier. They were honorable, brave, and completely confident in their victory. New images appeared. These showed the early battles of the war. Vorthon ships in perfect formations, firing their weapons in coordinated patterns. Human ships scattered and outgunned, trying desperately to fight back. The first 3 battles went exactly as the Vorthons expected, Sarah said. At New Beijing, they destroyed our entire defense fleet in 4 hours. At Tau Ceti Station, they captured our biggest military base without losing a single ship. At Kepler Colony, they took the planet in 2 days. She paused and looked around the hall. The galactic community watched these battles and nodded in approval. This was how war should be fought. With honor, with rules, with respect for proper conduct. The Vorthons were clearly the better warriors, and they deserved to win. More images showed human refugees fleeing from their homes, children crying as they left their planets, families crowded into ships not meant to carry so many people. But then something changed, Sarah said. Humans began to fight differently. The next image showed the Battle of Kepler 442b. Commander Jackson's small fleet was hiding in an asteroid field, waiting. The Vorthon ships approached in their usual perfect formation, ready for another easy victory. Commander Jackson did not meet them in open space, Sarah explained. Instead, he led them into the asteroid field. The Vorthons followed, confident that their superior ships could handle a few rocks. What happened next was shown in slow motion. Human ships suddenly appeared from behind asteroids, firing not at the Vorthon vessels, but at the asteroids themselves. Massive rocks broke apart, creating a storm of deadly debris. The Vorthon formation was torn apart as they tried to avoid the rocks while still fighting. The Vorthons lost 12 ships that day, Sarah said. Commander Jackson lost 3. For the first time in the war, humans had won a battle. Admiral Thexvar shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sarah could see that he remembered this battle well. The images changed again, showing the Battle of New Kyoto. This time, it was Lieutenant Park's ground forces defending a human colony. The Vorthon army had landed and was advancing toward the main city, where millions of civilians lived. Lieutenant Park had only 2,000 soldiers, Sarah said. The Vorthons had 20,000 plus tanks, aircraft, and heavy weapons. In a fair fight, the humans would have been destroyed in hours. The recording showed what actually happened. Vorthon forces advanced through empty streets, expecting to find human soldiers waiting for them. Instead, they found only refugees and civilians fleeing toward evacuation points. But the refugees were not all what they seemed, Sarah continued. The image zoomed in on a group of people carrying suitcases and children. As Vorthon soldiers passed them, the refugees suddenly dropped their disguises and attacked. Hidden weapons appeared from suitcases. Explosives were triggered in buildings. Fourth-hand supply trucks exploded as human soldiers emerged from hidden positions. Lieutenant Park's forces had disguised themselves as civilians, Sarah said. They hit the Vorthons from inside their own lines, then disappeared back into the crowd of real refugees. The Vorthon army spent 3 days fighting an enemy they could not see or find. Angry voices rose from the gallery. Several alien species were shouting in their own languages. Sarah could see that they were disgusted by this tactic. Judge Vexilla's metallic voice cut through the noise. Captain Chen, you are describing exactly the kind of dishonorable behavior that we condemn. Fighting while disguised as civilians is forbidden by every civilized code of war. Sarah nodded. Yes, Your Honor, by your rules, Lieutenant Park was a criminal. But by human rules, he was a hero who saved millions of lives. She gestured to the images again. The Vorthons could have bombarded the city from space and killed every civilian on the planet. They had the power to do this, but their honor code prevented them from harming non-combatants. Lieutenant Park used their honor against them. The next set of images showed Captain Singh's squadron in action above the planet Meridian. This battle was different from the others. Instead of weapons and explosions, it showed Vorthon pilots abandoning their ships and fleeing. Captain Singh discovered something interesting about Vorthon culture, Sarah said. They have strong religious beliefs about certain sounds and symbols. Captain Singh's ships broadcast these sounds during battle. The recording showed Vorthon fighter pilots suddenly stopping their attacks and flying away. Some were crying. Others were shaking with fear. Their formation fell apart as each pilot tried to escape the sounds coming from the human ships. No weapons were fired in this battle, Sarah said. Captain Singh won by using the Vorthon's own beliefs against them. The sounds he broadcast were not harmful to humans, but to Vorthons they represented spiritual corruption and evil. Ambassador Clickstall stood up, his forearms waving in anger. This is psychological torture. The humans use sacred religious concepts as weapons. Sarah looked at him calmly. Yes, we did. And it was very effective. The images continued, showing battle after battle. Each one demonstrated a different human tactic that violated galactic law. Night raids that caught Vorthon forces sleeping, booby traps that turned Vorthon equipment against them, false radio messages that sent enemy forces to wrong locations. In every case, Sarah said, humans won by doing things that the Vorthons did not expect. We fought at times when they thought fighting was improper. We attacked places they thought were safe. We used their own weapons, their own beliefs, and their own honor codes against them. Judge Mordak leaned forward. Captain Chen, you speak as if these violations of galactic law were good things. Do you feel no shame for what your species has done? Sarah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was serious and sad. Your Honor, let me tell you about the human colony on Ross 128. A new image appeared. It showed a beautiful planet with green forests and blue oceans. Cities dotted the landscape, and ships moved between orbital stations. It looked peaceful and prosperous. Ross 128 was home to 15 million humans, Sarah said. When the Vorthons invaded, the human defenders followed galactic law. They met the enemy in open battle during daylight hours. They announced their positions in advance. They fought with honor and courage. The next image showed the same planet 3 days later. The cities were gone. The forests were burning. The oceans were black with ash. The human defenders were completely destroyed, Sarah said quietly. All 15 million civilians died when the Vorthons bombarded the planet. The Vorthons did this because they could not conquer the planet quickly, and they needed to move their fleet to other targets. The hall was completely silent now. Even the prosecutors looked uncomfortable. The humans on Ross 128 followed your rules, Sarah continued. They fought with honor. They showed courage. They died with dignity. And they lost everything. She gestured to all the battle images that still hung in the air. After Ross 128, human commanders made a decision. We would not lose any more colonies because we were too polite to fight effectively. We would use every advantage we could find, even if it meant breaking your rules. Sarah walked closer to the judges. You ask if we feel shame for our tactics. Let me ask you something in return. Would you rather we had followed your rules and let billions of humans die? Would that have been more honorable? Judge Quirin's watery form rippled as he considered this. You are saying that your violations of galactic law were necessary for survival? I am saying more than that, Sarah replied. I am saying that your galactic laws were written by species who could afford to lose wars and still survive. They were written by species who never faced total extinction. She pointed to the Vorthon Admiral. Admiral Thexvar's people are spread across 100 star systems. If they lose one war, they can retreat and rebuild. Most of the species in this hall have multiple planets, vast resources, and thousands of years of civilization to fall back on. Sarah's voice grew stronger. Humans have one planet, one home. When the Vorthons invaded our colonies, they were not just taking territory. They were threatening our entire species. We could not afford to lose honorably. The images changed one final time, showing the end of the war. Vorthon forces retreating from human space. Peace negotiations beginning. Prisoners B and Sarah stood before the tribunal for the third day. Today would be different. Today, she would take these aliens on a journey through human history that would change how they saw everything. Honored judges, she began. Yesterday I told you about our war with the Vorthons. Today I want to tell you about our wars with ourselves. The hall grew quiet. Many of the alien observers had never heard much about Earth's history. They knew humans were young compared to most galactic species, but they did not know what that youth had cost. Let me start with a story from 2,500 years ago, Sarah said. There was a human city called Athens, and they were fighting another city called Sparta. Images appeared in the air, showing ancient Earth. The pictures came from human historical records, artwork, and old writings. They showed men in bronze armor fighting with spears and swords. The people of Athens were losing the war, Sarah continued. Sparta had better soldiers and more allies. So Athens did something that shocked everyone at the time. They built walls around their city and refused to come out and fight. The images showed massive stone walls surrounding a city by the sea. Outside the walls, enemy soldiers waited and grew frustrated. For years, the Spartans demanded that Athens fight properly. They wanted big battles in open fields, the way wars were supposed to be fought. But Athens stayed behind their walls and sent ships to attack Spartan territory from the sea. Judge Vexilla's metallic voice rang out. This sounds familiar. Athens refused to follow the proper rules of warfare. Sarah nodded. Exactly. And it worked. Athens survived for many years using this strategy. They proved that sometimes the best way to win is to refuse to fight the way your enemy wants you to fight. The images changed, showing a different time and place. Now they saw Asian landscapes with mountains and rivers. Soldiers in different armor moved in small groups instead of large armies. This is from a human book called The Art of War, written by a man named Sun Tzu, Sarah said. He taught that the best way to win a war is to never fight at all. The second best way is to fight when and where your enemy least expects it. She read from the ancient text, her voice carrying across the silent hall. All warfare is based on deception. When you are able to strike, appear unable. When you are near, appear far. When you are far, appear near. Ambassador Clickstall made an angry clicking sound. These humans have been teaching deception for thousands of years. Yes, Sarah said simply. Because deception saves lives. Sun Tzu taught that if you can win a war without fighting a single battle, you save the lives of soldiers on both sides. The images continued to change, showing different periods of human history. Roman legions building roads and walls, medieval knights using castles and siege weapons, ships with cannons fighting across Earth's oceans. For thousands of years, Sarah explained, humans fought each other over everything. Land resources, ideas, religions. We fought wars that lasted for decades. We fought wars that killed millions of people. We fought wars that destroyed entire civilizations. The images grew darker, showing more recent conflicts. Trenches full of mud and death. Cities destroyed by bombs. Millions of people fleeing from their homes. And through all of this fighting, we learned something that your species never had to learn, Sarah said. We learned that war is not a game with rules. War is about survival. And when survival is at stake, honor is a luxury that can get you killed. She paused and walked closer to the judges. Let me tell you about the Mongols. They conquered the largest empire in human history. Do you know how they did it? New images appeared, showing horsemen with bows racing across vast grasslands, cities surrounded by armies, people fleeing in terror. The Mongols did everything that you would call dishonorable, Sarah said. They attacked without warning. They used spies and lies to confuse their enemies. They terrorized civilian populations to make them surrender without fighting. They adopted the weapons and tactics of every people they conquered. She pointed to the images. They were so successful that some human cities surrendered just at the news that the Mongols were coming. They won wars without fighting battles, exactly like Sun Tzu taught. Judge Mordak looked troubled. Captain Chen, you speak of these tactics as if they were good things. But surely your people learned to be more civilized over time. Sarah's expression grew sad. Your Honor, let me show you what human civilization looked like just 80 years ago. The images that appeared next made several aliens gasp in shock. They showed massive wars that covered entire continents, cities destroyed by fire from the sky, millions of people in camps and prisons, weapons that could destroy whole cities in seconds. This was our Second World War, Sarah said quietly. 60 million humans died. We fought in the air, on land, under the sea, and even in space. We created weapons so terrible that we have never used them again. The images showed human soldiers fighting in jungles, deserts, and frozen wasteland. They showed battles that lasted for months over single cities. They showed the faces of people who had lost everything. In this war, humans learned that there are no rules when your enemy wants to destroy you completely, Sarah continued. We learned to fight at night because our enemies fought at night. We learned to use captured weapons because we needed every advantage we could get. We learned to attack supply lines because armies cannot fight without food and ammunition. She gestured to one particular image, showing soldiers moving through ruins. We learned to fight in cities because that is where our enemies were. We learned to disguise ourselves because sometimes surprise was the only way to survive. The alien observers were very quiet now. Some looked shocked. Others looked sick. A few seemed frightened. But here is what might surprise you, Sarah said. Even in our most terrible wars, humans created rules. New images appeared showing documents and meetings. People in uniform signing papers. Hospitals with red crosses painted on them. We called them the Geneva Conventions, Sarah explained. These were laws that all human nations agreed to follow, even when they were fighting each other. She began to list the rules, and with each one, examples appeared in the air. Prisoners of war must be treated well and not tortured. Hospitals and medical workers cannot be attacked. Civilians must be protected as much as possible. Chemical and biological weapons cannot be used. Wounded soldiers cannot be killed. Judge Quiran's watery form shifted with interest. So humans do have rules of warfare. We have many rules, Sarah said. We have rules about what weapons can be used and what weapons are too cruel. We have rules about how to treat prisoners and civilians. We have rules about protecting children and medical workers. She walked across the floor, her voice growing stronger. But notice what our rules are about. They are not about fighting fairly or giving the enemy a chance to win. They are about preventing unnecessary suffering and protecting people who cannot protect themselves. The images changed again, showing modern human conflicts. These were smaller wars, but they were still terrible. Sarah could see that many aliens were starting to understand something important. Our rules were written by people who knew what real war looked like, she said. They were written by people who had seen their cities burned and their families killed. They were written by people who understood that war is never fair, never clean, and never honorable. Sarah stopped walking and faced the judges directly. Your galactic rules assume that war is a contest between equals who want to test their strength against each other. Our rules assume that war is a terrible thing that sometimes cannot be avoided. But that can be made less terrible if everyone agrees to basic limits. Ambassador Clixtal stood up again, his voice angry. But your rules still allow all the things that we consider dishonorable. Night attacks, surprise raids, psychological warfare. Sarah nodded. Yes, they do, because we learned that these tactics are not dishonorable. They are effective. And in war, being effective means saving the lives of your own people. She turned back to the judges. Let me ask you something. In all your species' histories, how many of you have ever faced complete extinction? The hall was silent. Sarah could see aliens looking at each other, trying to think of an answer. How many of you have ever fought a war where losing meant that your entire species would be wiped out? She continued. Still silence. That is the difference between us, Sarah said. Most of your species grew up in a galaxy where there was always somewhere to retreat, always time to rebuild, always hope for tomorrow. You could afford to lose wars and still survive. She gestured to the images of human history that still hung in the air. Humans evolved on a single planet, fighting each other for limited resources. For most of our history, losing a war meant death or slavery. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Sarah's voice grew quiet but clear. We learned to fight the way we do because that was the only way to survive. We learned that sometimes the only choice is between victory and extinction. Judge Mordak was quiet for a long moment. Captain Chen, you paint a picture of humanity as a species shaped by constant warfare. But surely that makes you more dangerous, not less. Sarah smiled for the first time that day. Your Honor, that brings me to the most important part of my story. The fourth day of the trial brought a different energy to the Great Hall. Word had spread throughout the station about the human captain's defense. Species that had not originally planned to attend were now filling every available space. Some came to condemn humanity. Others came out of curiosity. All of them wanted to hear what Sarah Chen would say next. Sarah could feel the tension in the air as she stood to speak. Today would be the most important day. Today she would have to convince these aliens that humanity deserved a place in their galaxy. Honored judges, she began. For 3 days I have told you about human history and human warfare. Today I want to talk about the future. The Great Hall fell silent. Even the prosecutors leaned forward to listen. But first, Sarah continued, I think we need to address what really bothers you about human tactics. She gestured to the alien observers. You are not really angry because we attacked at night. You are not really upset because we used captured weapons. What truly disturbs you is that we won. Angry voices immediately rose from the galleries. Several alien representatives stood up to protest. Order. Judge Mordak called out, his voice echoing through the hall. Let the defendant speak. Sarah waited for quiet, then continued. The Vorthon Empire was supposed to be unbeatable. They had technology centuries ahead of ours. They had more ships, more soldiers, more resources. According to every military analysis, they should have conquered human space in a matter of months. She pointed to Admiral Thexvar. The Admiral's people have been warriors for 3,000 years. They have conquered dozens of star systems. They follow the ancient galactic traditions of honor and courage in battle. Admiral Thexvar nodded, still looking proud despite his people's defeat. And yet, Sarah said, they lost to a species that most of you consider primitive barbarians. This makes you uncomfortable because it suggests that maybe your ancient traditions are not as effective as you thought. Judge Vexilla's metallic voice cut through the murmurs. Captain Chen, are you suggesting that galactic civilization is wrong about how warfare should be conducted? Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been building toward. Your Honor, I am suggesting that galactic civilization has forgotten what warfare is actually for. The hall erupted in noise. Dozens of aliens were shouting, clicking, buzzing, and making other sounds of outrage. Some were demanding that Sarah be removed for insulting their ancient traditions. Judge Mordak called for order again, but it took several minutes for the noise to die down. When quiet returned, Sarah continued as if nothing had happened. Let me tell you a story about why your rules exist in the first place. New images appeared in the air. These showed the early days of galactic civilization, when many species first began to travel between stars and meet each other. Thousands of years ago, Sarah said, the galaxy was full of young, aggressive species. Wars were fought with terrible weapons that could destroy entire planets. Billions died in conflicts that had no real purpose except pride and conquest. The images showed the devastation of these ancient wars, dead worlds, refugee fleets carrying the survivors of destroyed civilizations, space battles that turned entire star systems into graveyards. So the surviving species made an agreement. Sarah continued. They would create rules for warfare that would limit the damage and prevent total destruction. They would fight, but they would fight in ways that allowed both sides to survive. She gestured to the gallery of alien observers. These rules worked. For thousands of years, galactic wars have been limited conflicts with relatively few casualties. Species can lose wars and still continue to exist. The galaxy has been peaceful and stable. Judge Quiren's watery form rippled with interest. Captain Chen, you seem to be arguing in favor of the very rules that you violated. Sarah shook her head. No, Your Honor. I am explaining why those rules cannot apply to humanity. She walked closer to the judges. Your rules work because they assume certain things. They assume that both sides in a conflict have multiple planets and can afford to lose some. They assume that both sides have been part of galactic civilization long enough to understand the consequences of breaking the rules. They assume that both sides have something to gain by keeping wars limited. The images changed, showing human space. Earth appeared blue and green and alone. Around it were scattered human colonies, small and vulnerable. Humans have one homeworld, Sarah said simply. We have a few dozen colonies, but they are young and cannot survive on their own. If we lose Earth, our species dies. If we lose our colonies, millions of our people become refugees with nowhere to go. She pointed to the image of Earth. When the Vorthons invaded our space, they were not just threatening our territory. They were threatening our existence. We could not afford to fight a limited war because there was nothing limited about what we stood to lose. Admiral Thexvar stood up again. This time his voice carried a different tone. Captain Chen speaks the truth. My people intended to claim all of human space for our empire. We had no plans to allow humans to keep any worlds. Sarah nodded to him. Thank you, Admiral. You see, judges, the galactic rules assume that wars are fought between equals, who understand that they must continue to coexist after the fighting ends. But the Vorthons were not planning to coexist with humanity. They were planning to replace us. Judge Mordak looked troubled. Captain Chen, even if what you say is true, it does not justify breaking galactic law. If every species decides to ignore the rules when they feel threatened, chaos will return to the galaxy. That, Sarah said, brings me to the most important part of my defense. She pressed a control and new images appeared. These showed documents and recordings from the end of the Frontier War. When the war ended, human forces controlled Vorthon space, Sarah said. We had defeated their fleets, occupied their colonies, and surrounded their home world. By the laws of galactic warfare, the Vorthon Empire belonged to us. The images showed human ships in orbit around Vorthon planets, Vorthon leaders waiting to surrender. The proud empire reduced to helplessness. At this moment, Sarah continued, humanity had a choice. We could follow the human traditions of warfare and completely destroy our enemies. We could follow galactic traditions and claim the Vorthon Empire as our territory. Or we could do something that neither human nor galactic law required. The next images showed the peace negotiations. Human and Vorthon leaders sitting together discussing terms, medical ships treating wounded from both sides, prisoners being exchanged. We chose mercy, Sarah said. We returned all Vorthon territory except for the human colonies they had invaded. We treated their wounded. We released their prisoners. We asked for no tribute or payment. We helped them rebuild their damaged fleets. She looked directly at Admiral Thexvar. Admiral, please tell the court what terms humanity offered your people. Admiral Thexvar stood slowly. His voice was quiet but clear. The humans offered us full restoration of our independence. They asked only that we sign a non-aggression pact and agree to respect human territory. They even helped us repair the damage from the war. Murmurs of surprise went through the hall. Many aliens had not heard these details before. Sarah continued. We did this because our rules of war teach us that enemies today might be allies tomorrow. We did this because we understood that lasting peace requires respect, not just victory. Judge Vexilla sounded confused. Captain Chen, if humans are capable of such mercy and victory, why do you fight so ruthlessly during war? Sarah smiled sadly. Because mercy and victory means nothing if you do not survive to show it. We fight ruthlessly because we must win. We show mercy afterward because we want to live in peace. She gestured to the images of the peace negotiations. The galactic rules try to limit warfare by making it less effective. Human rules try to limit warfare by ending it as quickly as possible. Which approach actually reduces suffering? The question hung in the air. Sarah could see aliens throughout the hall thinking about this. Some looked uncomfortable with the implications. Let me put it another way, Sarah said. The Ross 128 colony followed galactic rules. They fought honorably, announced their attacks, met the enemy in open battle. The war on that planet lasted 6 months and ended with 15 million dead. She pointed to different battle records. The Battle of New Kyoto used human tactics. Lieutenant Park's forces disguised themselves as civilians and used surprise attacks. The battle lasted 3 days and ended with fewer than 1,000 casualties on both sides. The contrast was stark. Many aliens were now looking at the evidence with new understanding. Which battle was more honorable? Sarah asked. The one where everyone followed the rules and millions died? Or the one where the rules were broken and almost everyone lived? Ambassador Clickstall finally stood up, his forearms trembling with anger. These are lies and manipulations. The humans twist everything to make their barbarism seem justified. Sarah turned to face him calmly. Ambassador Clickstall, let me ask you a question. How many wars has your species fought in the last 1,000 years? Clickstall clicked angrily. The Zephyrian people are peaceful. We have not fought a major war in 800 years. And how many wars have you won? Sarah asked. The ambassador looked confused. We do not fight wars to win them. We fight to defend our principles and honor. Sarah nodded. Exactly. You can afford to lose wars because losing will not destroy your species. You have the final day of the trial brought the largest crowd yet. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy had come to hear the verdict. The Crystal Hall buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages as aliens debated what they had learned over the past 4 days. Sarah stood in the center of the hall one last time. She felt calm now, knowing that she had said everything that needed to be said. Whatever happened next was out of her hands. Judge Mordak called for order, and the great hall fell silent. Captain Chen, you have presented your defense over 4 days. Now, before we reach our verdict, you may make your final statement. Sarah took a deep breath and looked around the hall. She saw species that had traveled from across the galaxy to be here. Some faces showed anger. Others showed curiosity. A few even showed understanding. Honored judges, members of the galactic community, she began. 5 days ago, I stood in this hall accused of being a war criminal. My species was called barbaric, dishonorable, and unfit for civilized society. She paused and gestured to the evidence that still hung in the air around them. I have not denied any of the charges against us. Yes, we fought at night. Yes, we used deception. Yes, we broke 17 separate articles of galactic law. Murmurs went through the crowd, but Sarah continued without stopping. But I have also shown you something else. I have shown you that we had reasons for everything we did. I have shown you that our tactics, while different from yours, are not evil or mindless. And most importantly, I have shown you that we are capable of mercy and honor when the fighting ends. She walked closer to the judges. You must now decide not just whether humans are guilty of breaking galactic law, but whether galactic law should apply to a species that was never part of creating it. Judge Vexilla's metallic voice rang out. Captain Chen, the law applies to all species equally. That is what makes it just. Sarah shook her head. Your Honor, with respect, that is what makes it unfair. The hall erupted in angry voices. Several alien representatives stood up to protest this direct challenge to galactic law. Judge Mordak called for order, then looked down at Sarah with stern eyes. Captain Chen, you are very close to contempt of court. Sarah stood her ground. Your Honor, I am not showing contempt for this court. I am showing contempt for laws that would force my species to die honorably, rather than live effectively. She turned to address the entire assembly. For thousands of years, your galactic community has lived by rules that work well for established civilizations. You have created a system where wars are limited, casualties are low, and everyone can continue to exist after conflicts end. The images around them showed the peaceful galaxy that these rules had created. Trade ships moving between star systems, diplomatic meetings solving problems without violence, the benefits of galactic civilization. This system works, Sarah admitted. It has brought peace and prosperity to hundreds of species. But it only works because all of those species entered the system voluntarily, after they had already established themselves as major powers. She gestured to Earth, alone and blue in the darkness of space. Humanity was never given that choice. We were invaded by an empire that followed galactic law, and we were expected to lose gracefully according to rules we had never agreed to follow. Judge Quiran's watery form shifted as he spoke. Captain Chen, every species must follow galactic law if they wish to be part of galactic civilization. Then perhaps, Sarah said quietly, galactic civilization needs to change. The hall fell completely silent. Even the prosecutors looked shocked at this statement. Sarah continued before anyone could interrupt. I am not asking you to abandon your laws. I am asking you to recognize that they are not perfect. I am asking you to consider that maybe young species need different rules than old ones. She pointed to the records of human battles. Look at what we accomplished. We defeated a superior enemy, while taking fewer casualties than any war in galactic history. We showed mercy to our defeated enemies. We restored peace quickly and effectively. Admiral Thexvar stood up in the gallery. The human speaks truth, he said through his translator. My people have fought many wars according to galactic law. None ended as well as our war with humanity. Other voices began to join in. A representative of the Kalari people spoke next. The humans ended their war in 2 years. Our last conflict with the Vorthon Empire lasted 15 years and accomplished nothing. More aliens began to speak. A crystal-skinned being from the Outer Rim talked about how galactic law had failed to protect his people from raiders. A furry creature with 6 legs mentioned how following proper combat procedures had cost his species 3 colonies. Sarah could see that something was changing in the hall. Aliens who had come to condemn humanity were beginning to question their own assumptions. Ambassador Klixtal stood up, his 4 arms waving frantically. This is madness. If we allow one species to break the law, others will follow. The galaxy will return to chaos. Sarah turned to face him. Ambassador, let me ask you something. What is more important, following the law or achieving the goals that the law was meant to accomplish? Klixtal clicked angrily. The law exists to prevent unnecessary death and destruction. Exactly, Sarah said. And human tactics prevented more death and destruction than following galactic law would have. So which approach better serves the law's purpose? The ambassador had no answer for this. Sarah walked to the center of the hall and spoke to everyone present. Members of the galactic community, I stand before you not as a criminal, but as a representative of a different way of thinking about conflict and survival. She gestured to all the evidence that surrounded them. You have seen human history. You have seen our wars, our tactics, and our capacity for both violence and mercy. You have seen that we are not mindless barbarians, but a people who have learned hard lessons about what it takes to survive. Her voice grew stronger. And now you must decide what kind of galaxy you want to live in. Do you want a galaxy where every species must conform to rules written by the powerful? Or do you want a galaxy where different approaches are allowed to coexist? Judge Mordak leaned forward. Captain Chen, what exactly are you proposing? Sarah had been waiting for this question. I propose that galactic law be modified to account for species like humanity. Young civilizations with limited resources should be allowed to use different tactics until they are established enough to survive limited warfare. She pointed to the images of the peace negotiations. I propose that the test of a species' fitness for galactic civilization should not be how they fight, but how they treat their enemies after victory. The hall buzzed with conversation as aliens discussed this idea. Sarah could see that many were intrigued by the possibility. I propose, she continued, that humans be allowed to maintain our own military doctrines while agreeing to follow galactic law regarding the treatment of prisoners, civilians, and defeated enemies. Judge Vexilla spoke up. And if we refuse? If we find humanity guilty and order sanctions? Sarah smiled, and for the first time in 5 days it was a genuinely happy smile. Then we will accept your judgment and withdraw from galactic space. We will return to Earth and our colonies and continue to live according to our own rules. She paused and looked around the hall. But you will have lost the chance to learn from us just as we have lost the chance to learn from you. The silence that followed was different from before. This was not the silence of shock or anger, but the silence of serious consideration. Finally, Judge Mordak spoke. The tribunal will now deliberate. All parties will remain while we reach our decision. The 3 judges moved to a private area behind their platform. Through the crystal walls, Sarah could see them in intense discussion. Judge Mordak's tree-like form swayed as he spoke. Judge Vexilla's metallic body reflected light as she gestured. Judge Quiren's watery shape flowed and changed as he considered the arguments. While they waited, Sarah noticed that conversations had broken out throughout the hall. Aliens were talking to each other about what they had heard. Some arguments were heated, but many seemed thoughtful and curious. Admiral Thexvar approached the human delegation again. Captain Chen, he said, regardless of what the court decides, I want you to know that I no longer consider your people to be without honor. Sarah stood and faced him. Admiral, that means more to me than you know. Your people fought bravely, and they deserved better than to be invaded by an enemy who refused to fight fairly. The Vorthon Admiral looked confused. But you did fight fairly. You fought to win, and you showed mercy to the defeated. Is that not what honor truly means? Before Sarah could answer, the judges returned to their platform. The hall fell silent as Judge Mordak prepared to speak. After careful consideration, the judge began. This tribunal has reached its decision. Sarah felt her heart beating faster, but she kept her face calm. On the charges of violating galactic combat law, Judge Mordak continued, we find humanity guilty as charged. Disappointed murmurs went through the human delegation, but Sarah held up a hand to keep them quiet. However, the judge continued, we also find that these violations were justified by circumstances that galactic law does not adequately address.